Well, you know me. Always glad to help.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another unpopular opinion, and today I'm going to be talking about the fourth Indiana Jones movie.
That's gonna be a big help.
Now, for those of you who are longtime viewers, you'll know that I already did a video on this movie. In fact, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was my first unpopular opinion review. In it, I discussed why I love it and why I think it's a great movie.
Come on.
Now, being that that was my first real video, the quality wasn't great, the audio was sloppy, and I kept stuttering. For the most part, my opinion hasn't changed. I still love the movie. However, with the recent release of that nightmare Dial of Destiny, I figured the time is right to revisit Crystal Skull and update that video. For the most part, I'm going to be making the same points as last time and adding a few new arguments. But before I begin, I just want to say that most of the viewers on this channel aren't subscribed yet. So do me a favor, hit that like button and drop a subscribe. It costs you nothing to do so, it's totally free, and just one like can go a long way and really help me out. Also, check out my previous video where I reviewed Temple of Doom. It's a good one, so check it out. Now, for this review, we're gonna pretend Dial of Destiny doesn't exist. So with that in mind, let's proceed. Now, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was very financially successful, and critics gave it pretty good reviews. The fans, on the other hand, not so much. Most Indiana Jones fans really hate this movie. Their chief complaints are how the movie relies too much on CGI, how there's a few goofy or unrealistic moments, or they say things like that's not how magnets work, and the biggest complaint is the sci-fi nature and how the film includes aliens. Now, in my opinion, those complaints are not warranted, and those things don't do anything to diminish the quality of the movie. In fact, those aspects made the film what it is and added to its enjoyment factor. This movie has all the hallmarks of a great Indiana Jones adventure. It features amazing heart-pounding action sequences, awesome special effects, great villains, and an epic quest. So the plot of this movie is Indiana gets kidnapped and is forced to aid Soviet soldiers steal a top-secret crate from Area 51, which is where the Ark of the Covenant was stored. He manages to escape but is under heavy investigation by the FBI. As a result, he loses his job. Then he gets word that his old friend Harold Oxley has been abducted. However, Oxley manages to locate an ancient Mesoamerican relic known as the Crystal Skull. So Indy teams up with a young Mutt Williams, who turns out to be his son, and the two have to find the skull and return it to its place of origin before the Soviets get a hold of it, because whoever returns the skull gets control over its power.
Right, so there's some kind of power. What's the power?
I don't know, kid. It's just a story.
So firstly, the fact that the movie takes place in the 1950s during the Cold War, I thought that having the Soviets be the villains, that was all too appropriate. It makes total sense, because the Cold War, the Red Scare, and the arms race. It's the perfect combination. Also, the fact that Stalin really did have a strange obsession with psychological warfare lends credibility as to why the Soviets wanted to go after the Crystal Skull. And Cate Blanchett as Spalko was a great villain. Not only was she really resourceful and cunning, but she's also so annoying and despicable. Kind of like Belloc, a smarmy little prick who trolls and has his henchmen do his fighting for him, but she herself actually fights against our heroes. She takes an active role in dealing with Indy, not to mention the two actually get into a physical confrontation when he throws her out of a moving car, which that's rare for the Indiana Jones movies, for the main villain and Indy to get into a fight. Also, the fact that she's so annoying yet so clever and how you just want to see her get punched in the face, that just makes her death and comeuppance all the more satisfying. And I do love that the movie kept with the tradition of the main villain being killed by the power of the treasure they sought. In her case, she couldn't handle all the knowledge, her mind was overwhelmed, and it was a sensory overload, which caused her to burst into flames.
There's some things in this world that weren't meant for mortal eyes.
Now, in terms of the treasure and quest in this movie, I think it was awesome. The concept of the Crystal Skull and its abilities were so cool.
What is this thing?
I really like how it has the power of knowledge and telepathy, and its influence on people and things. It's really cool and mysterious, and I really love the detail that if you look into its eyes, you run the risk of going catatonic. Like that whole sequence where Indy has to stare into its eyes was one of the coolest moments of the franchise. The skull has the ability to stimulate unused parts of the brain, but it can also overwhelm you if you can't handle it, which is what happened to Oxley. And I thought the idea of returning the skull to its place of origin was a really original concept. concept. Usually in the movies, Indy has to claim the treasure and recover it before his enemies, but in this movie, Indy had to pick up where Oxley left off and glue the pieces together in order to find the skull and return it to the mythical city of Akator, otherwise known as El Dorado. And I really loved this concept. It made the movie fast-paced, and it also allowed us to see more ancient ruins and learn more about the mythology of the skull. El Dorado and the idea of conquistadors encountering bizarre lost civilizations in the jungle has always been fascinating to me. And the scene where Indiana is explaining the backstory to Mutt and the legend of Akator was genuinely one of the best scenes. There's always that scene in the Indiana Jones movies where Indy has to explain the treasure and the legend behind it for the benefit of the audience, like how Indy explained the Ark to the Army intelligence men and how he told Willie about the stones and the conversation with Donovan about the Holy Grail. But this one takes the cake. The tone was uneasy and mysterious, plus the added bonus of Indy's previous failed attempt at finding Akator and his friend having an obsession with it and is currently on the quest. That's what made it so fascinating. And while we're on the topic, I really loved how in this movie, Indy had to do a lot of puzzle solving and archaeology. Seeing him navigate ancient ruins and following old maps and translating ancient languages, which frankly is the best part of these movies, was on full display. For example, when Indy and Mutt went into that creepy graveyard and them going through the tunnels and the caverns, which led them to the grave of the conquistadors, that was amazing.
This is incredible.
And honestly, that was probably the best part of the movie. The tone was mysterious and I loved it.
Come on, genius. Bring the backpack.
Then having Indy and the group explore Akator and navigate the obstacles was the cherry on top. It was really cool seeing Indy go through the jungle and focusing on Mesoamerican history. Now, another reason why I love this film so much is because I can actually relate to it on a personal level in the sense that in this film, Indy is exploring ancient Mesoamerican cities and is in Latin America. All of his other quests take place in faraway lands on the other side of the planet, but in this adventure, it takes place in the Americas, and I myself have been to Latin America many times. I've also been to a few Mesoamerican cities, ruins, and archaeological sites. So when I see Indiana climbing Mesoamerican pyramids and finding native structures in the jungle, it brings back all the cool and fascinating memories, firsthand experiences, and encounters I had doing the same thing. I don't really have that connection with the other films, considering I've never been to Africa, Asia, or Europe. So yeah, when I watch this movie, it brings back all the feelings of nostalgia and excitement of when I was doing similar activities. Also, the action in this movie was stellar. The escape from Area 51 was awesome. The motorcycle chase was great. That fight in the graveyard rocked. And of course, that epic jungle chase scene. The fights were great, Indy kicked ass, and the stunt work was amazing.
Indy! Shut up! Indy! Shut up! Indy!
I even love that sword fight between Mutt and Spalko. The choreography looked flawless, and the swordplay was beautiful. Not to mention, this movie features one of my favorite on-screen fistfights, the ant fight. Now, this fight was brilliant for a lot of reasons. For one, Indiana faced an opponent who he had many intense encounters with throughout the film, Colonel Dovchenko. Many times in the film, these two came to blows, but this fight was where they got to go at it uninterrupted. The best part was Indy was facing someone of equal skill in this fight. The other climactic fights don't have the same energy as this one, considering that the boxer fight in Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indy was fighting a guy who was much more skilled than he was. And the other two fights, Indy was fighting opponents who didn't really pose much of a threat to him, and they only got cheap shots in. And I always say that this was like an MMA UFC fight in an Indiana Jones movie, because the two are enclosed in a small area surrounded by man-eating ants, kind of like the Octagon, and they were going at it using striking, grappling, and kicking. This was honestly such an amazing and exciting fight, and Dovchenko's death was gruesome. So now I'm going to talk about the big thing that really pissed off the fans, and that was the aliens. Whenever I hear people talk about this movie and why they hate it, they always say it's because the aliens. They say it takes the realism and seriousness out of the Indiana Jones movies. However, my response to that is this: when has Indiana Jones ever been a realistic adventure series? No disrespect to religion, because I myself am religious, but there's nothing realistic about angels of death flying around, or the power of God smiting a German army, magic rocks and witchcraft, or the Holy Grail insta-healing a gunshot wound. Like, if you think about it, those are just as unrealistic as aliens. Also, I like the direction the sci-fi aspect took this movie. The other films featured Indy going after religious artifacts of a supernatural nature. I like how they took a different direction and approach in this movie, and they had Indy face off against the paranormal.
Belief, Dr. Jones, is a gift you have yet to receive.
Also, the movie takes place in in the 1950s, a decade where aliens and sci-fi were all the rage, and it makes total sense for this movie to feature that. Also, we've all had discussions about whether or not aliens have visited us. We've all wondered if we're all alone in the universe, and there's always that big discussion of who built the pyramids, how was Machu Picchu built with ancient primitive tools, plus the added bonus of ancient hieroglyphics depicting alien-looking beings or featuring descriptions of advanced technology. How can this be? Maybe it's aliens. Maybe they helped primitive people create amazing civilizations. I don't know, but we've all had these discussions, and we're all fascinated by this concept. That's why the show Ancient Aliens has been around for so long. It's definitely a cool topic that we've all indulged. So seeing Indiana Jones step away from the religious and focus on that discussion was not only really fascinating, but it was original and a fresh take that was not far-fetched. And in the spirit of the previous films, it takes face value of old mythology and folklore and puts it in a modern setting.
Oh, I believe, sister. That's why I'm down here.
And I love the closure it gives to the franchise and the character. Indy gets to reconnect with his true love, Marion, and he finally gets to have a kid and a family because, like I said, Dial of Destiny doesn't exist. And seeing Indy get married and having a happily ever after was just a really nice sentiment. Lastly, before I close, in terms of those moments of goofy or unrealistic scenes like Shia LaBeouf swinging on monkey vines or the nuked fridge, I mean, I get it, and those are kind of silly, but that's nothing new to the franchise. There's been multiple moments where Indy escaped crazy circumstances by doing over-the-top things, and no one cares. For example, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indy manages to crawl under a moving truck, and he uses his whip to climb back into the driver's seat, all while he has a gunshot wound. As awesome as that was, that's totally unrealistic. He also clings onto a submarine undetected while it sails to the Aegean Sea, and doesn't die from the exposure to the elements or starvation. In the second movie, he survives a plane crash by using an inflatable boat. Again, that's not really realistic, and it's kind of silly despite it being awesome. And in The Last Crusade, Indy escapes a moving train by using a magic box. So nuking the fridge or swinging on monkey vines really isn't out of the ordinary for this movie. Plus, Indy did drink from the Holy Grail, so that probably aided in his survival.
What exactly am I being accused of besides surviving a nuclear blast?
Also, that scene did inspire one of the best maps in Call of Duty. Just saying. Also, I love how Lucas and Spielberg showcased the time between the previous movie and this one. Last Crusade came out 19 years before this did, and Crystal Skull takes place 19 years later after the last movie was set. I thought that was a cool little detail. Also, the fact that Indy's aged a bit doesn't actually bother me, considering it really isn't the years, it's the mileage. The man is as nimble and agile as ever. Also, it adds to his badass and awesome status, because older men are what we look up to. He's seasoned, experienced, and still as strong as before. I think the fact that Indy is older in this movie just makes him more badass and more masculine. Older men have their act together, and Indiana just proves that. Also, the musical score by John Williams was top-notch. The only complaints I have of this movie is how Indy doesn't fire his gun at all, and he barely uses his whip. He only uses it twice in the beginning to disarm the Russian soldier and to swing off the rafters. And then at the end when he tried to save Mac.
Use your legs, Mac. I can't do it alone. Job's ready.
I'm gonna be alright.
But at least we get to see Indy fire an RPG.
I think I'd cover my ears if I were you.
Anyway, guys, that's all I have for you. I think Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was a great movie. In fact, I can confidently say that it is, without a doubt, my favorite Indiana Jones flick. I think the hate for this movie is not warranted. I think the fans were way too harsh and unfair when judging it, and I think most of the complaints are not justified. It fits very well into the franchise. It features an awesome quest, great new characters, formidable villains, and awesome special effects and art direction. I mean, seriously, the sets in this movie were top-notch. I really can't state how much I love this movie and how much it means to me. But that's all I have for you. There were a few things that I chose to leave out, but I think you get where I'm coming from. So what did you think of Crystal Skull? Let me know by commenting below. Also, be sure to hit that like button.
Don't say hi, Mac.
And smash the subscribe. Also, check me out on Instagram and give me a follow. That will be linked in the description below. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next Unpopular Opinion.
You're a teacher?
Part-time.